Back here on Follow the Money, live from Las Vegas from Circus Sportsbook, Stormy Buonantony alongside the Super Bowl champ, Shaun King. Happy to continue our NFL conversation now with ESPN's Field Yates, NFL insider, co-host of the Fantasy Football Podcast at Field Yates on Twitter. Field, thank you so much for coming on with us.
No problem, guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, obviously the Patriots-Bills game was an interesting one, to say the least, last night. It's not every day that you see a quarterback win a game after having 19 pass yards and negative rush yards, but that is where we at. What were some of your biggest takeaways from the Monday Night Football game?
Yeah, first of all, one of those games that I don't think, even if you had no vested interest in the game, you're going to remember that one for a while. The NFL has no shortage of drama. It has no shortage of games in which are impacted by weather, but I can't recall a game that was impacted as much by the weather this season as that one was. The only other one that comes close is when San Francisco and Indianapolis played on Sunday Night Football in effectively a monsoon earlier this year. But by the end of the game, both of those teams were throwing the football pretty effectively. Last night, though, was a game where I got to tell you, I was very happy to be on my own couch last night and not in Buffalo, New York at that game, because you probably couldn't have paid me enough or given me enough sleeping bags or hand warmers to be out there during what looked like a very, very chilly night.
You know, it's so amazing, Field, what sports betting and fantasy have done to, like, the emotional roller coaster that you're on. Like, there were people that had the under at 46 and saw it drop to 40. And, I mean, they were doing all kind of gymnastics routines. They were so excited. But there are people in fantasy who are diehard Patriot fans who are probably screaming at the TV, throw the ball, I have Mac Jones at QB. Like, how amazing is it now with fantasy and sports betting being a part of watching these NFL games?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really has done an incredible job in terms of bubbling up extra interest. It's not that every primetime game is not compelling. I mean, I don't care how many days of your life you've spent studying the Cardinals or the Rams. If you're not watching Monday Night Football next week, you just don't love football. I mean, you have to enjoy what's going to be hopefully one of the better primetime games of the year. We also, though, have a Sunday night game that pits the Bears and the Packers. And those are two teams going in very different directions. And that one could very well be a 20-point blowout in the Packers' favor. And I think that's the kind of game in which you see fantasy carry even more weight than it already does. Because while I may not expect the Bears to keep it competitive with the Packers on Sunday night, I might need 12 fantasy points from David Montgomery. And if I get those 12 fantasy points, it might be the difference between me making the playoffs or missing the playoffs in my league. So I've always told people that fantasy and gambling have allowed the NFL to not just be a 17 game or 18 week operation, but really a 365 day of the year operation, because there's so much interest all throughout the year. And I think a lot of it ties to gambling and fantasy, which continue to grow the audience in a major way.
Yeah, I grew up here in Las Vegas, and I remember as a kid saying like certain things about how I was rooting for a quarterback or I was rooting for a player. And my dad was like, no, I need him not to do well. Stop, Stormy, because he had skin in the game in a different way than I did, obviously. But one last thing, just as we wrap up the Monday Night Football conversation, as it relates to fantasy, in some leagues, Mac Jones, I believe the number we saw from one of our colleagues, had 0.46 points last night. Does this type of a game help or hinder the offensive player rookie of the year standings for our guy?
My sense is that the Patriots winning helps him more than losing and putting up bad numbers would have helped him, because I think what we're ultimately going to find, and I'm like maybe I'm a little bit of a wet blanket in this regard, but like, I don't bother with any awards for the postseason until like week 17 or 18, right? Like, I have no idea who's going to be MVP or who's going to be the rookie of the year. But if the Patriots finish with 12 wins this year, as an example, Mac Jones continues to play steady football the rest of the way, I would think there's a pretty darn good chance that Mac Jones has a shot at the NFL's rookie of the year. That being said, if the Bengals win 10 games and Jamar Chase finishes with a flurry and has 1,500 receiving yards, then I think it's going to be an interesting conversation there. So my general sense is that anytime you get a win, it probably pushes the narrative a little bit further in your favor. But I think that Mac Jones, Jamar Chase probably have a fairly, like right now, that's about as narrow as it gets. Maybe Jalen Waddle makes the late push as well, but the Dolphins, even with their 5-game winning streak, are in a different sort of stratosphere of the standings right now.
Field, I have Mac Jones on an 11-1 ticket to be NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year. So I feel like Nostradamus. But how much of his lead plays into the fact that none of the other high-profile first-round draft picks at quarterback are having even an average season? Like, I knew Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville wouldn't win, but statistically, I thought he'd be doing a lot more than he has. Justin Fields, they didn't start him. He's battled injuries. Zach Wilson has been ineffective when not injured. What's your evaluation so far on this rookie group of quarterbacks, and can any of them make a run in this last quarter of the season?
I have sort of a cold take on the quarterbacks for this rookie class, is that I'm not really down on any of the 4 that were drafted ahead of Mac Jones. I'm just more optimistic about Mac Jones than I was coming into the season, and I was actually fairly confident in Mac Jones' ability. I think what it probably teaches me more and more and more, and I think this is really relevant as we sort of dive into the pre-draft cycle, which I know college football still has the bowl season left, but as you guys know, players like Kayvon Thibodeau from Oregon have already declared their intentions. He's going to stay out of the bowl game. He's one of the top probably 5 or so players in the draft this year. We're kind of getting into it. You're going to hear Mel Kiper Jr. and Todd McShay's voice a whole bunch over the next month, and we'll continue to talk about these draft prospects. And I think what I'm reminded of, and listen, Shaun, you know this, you played the position yourself. Fit matters more than anything else, right? Like, it's sort of like a marriage. 2 good people can get married. Doesn't mean they're the right people for each other, right? And in the NFL, you got to find a quarterback and a system and a coach that all are in harmony. And the Patriots are the perfect place for Mac Jones right now. They've got an outstanding coaching staff. They've got a really good roster, great offensive line, really good running game. And I'm not saying that Mac Jones is a byproduct of what they've done. What I'm saying is that Mac, with his skill set, can thrive, and I think his confidence is going to grow because of these wins. Say what you want about 3 passing attempts. Mac Jones went to bed last night, if you went to sleep at all, after I'd imagine the Patriots flew home, and he's probably saying to himself, 9-4, number 1 team in my division. I can go out there and I can compete at the highest level with even one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in Josh Allen.
You know what's interesting, Phil, and we can put a bow on this right here. I had Mac Jones rated as the number 1 quarterback in this draft by far. I'll never forget texting Booger McFarland after the San Francisco 49ers traded up and surprisingly took Trey Lance. And I said they will regret that decision for the rest of Lynch and Shanahan's tenure. And here's why. And Phil, I'll give you this and use it this year when you're looking at the quarterbacks. Go by what you see, not by what you hope to see. And when you look at the actual film of those kids coming out of college, Mac Jones' Alabama film is head and shoulders better. But people got caught up in what they thought Trey Lance could look like or they thought Zach Wilson could look like. And I think that's always a very dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know we're trying to put a bow in the conversation. We could talk about this for an hour, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the great point is that, part of what's happened in recent years is Mac Jones played with, 2 first-round pick wide receivers last year, a couple of offensive linemen that go in the top 35 picks, guys, Najee Harris is a first-round running back, and some guys that weren't draft eligible are going to be top picks this year. And that was used against Mac Jones in the draft. Hey, he's just good because those guys around him are so good. He's a 3rd-round quarterback playing in a 1st-round offense, where maybe the reality is that, he helped lift that tide, right? I mean, he literally, I no pun intended with the Crimson Tide, but like we heard both Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith say during the pre-draft process, they were each asked, hey, who would you choose if you had to pick one of your quarterbacks from the past 2 years, Tua and Mac Jones? And at least one of them, so don't quote me if it was at least one of them for sure, said, oh, Mac Jones, right? And that's normally the question that when you're asked it, the answer is, hey, they're both great guys, mean a lot to me, love playing with each of them. I can't choose. It's like choosing between your kids, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was telling. So, Mac Jones, has a long ways to go, as any rookie quarterback does. But I think no matter whether you enjoy the Patriots, you do not enjoy the Patriots, you have to appreciate the process. And you have to appreciate the professionalism that organization continues to exhibit, especially when you look around the NFL, where we see some organizations that are far less stable and consistently doing the wrong thing. You have to applaud a team that seems to find a way to frequently do the right thing.
Great stuff, Field. Really appreciate the time.